Welcome to the Energy Essentials podcast. My name is Kate Mulvany. I'm a principal consultant at Cornwall Insight. I'm joined by Tom Edwards, principal modeller at Cornwall Insight.
Hello, everybody.
And Peter Stanley, Elexon CEO. Peter, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Today, we're diving into the topic of energy flexibility. If you're interested in settlement, flexibility, battery optimization, all the market reforms that are driving the energy transition, Elexon is already part of your world. We know Elexon's role is developing, their stewardship of data, it's going to stay critical for keeping the lights on as well as creating confidence in the fairness of the market. From market-wide half-hourly settlement to IT upgrades, Elexon's been at the forefront of multi-program changes that are delivering that more complex digitalised system. Economy-wide decarbonisation, it's a huge undertaking. We're all in the relatively early stages of that massive transformation. And there's a lot for organisations across industry to take from the last couple of years. So thinking about that transformation, Peter, what's your view on the government's ambition for a clean power system by 2030? Where are we on that process? And if you could maybe fast forward to 2030, what does success look like from Elexon's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is that the whole Clean Power Action Plan, which let's not forget was only launched less than 6 months ago, and yet it seems we've been living in that world for quite some time, and that I think is testament to the fact that the whole of industry has really kind of galvanized itself around the target that's laid out. So number one, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the level of ambition that is set out in that action plan. But in many ways, that's the thing I think that's created the buzz and excitement from industry to go after that. We all understand the importance of it. And I think up until that point, there was a lot of concern around how that would all get orchestrated. And, there's been lots of talk since then around top-down, bottom-up plans, central control. But I think what it has done is given us all a really clear kind of North Star for us to get after. And I probably said this before, but one thing I think that this sector is very good at is, when we're given a very clear goal, there is a real enthusiasm, particularly given the very strong purpose around net zero and Clean Power 2030. I think there is a genuine enthusiasm to get after it. So I think that's been hugely welcome. And then, of course, latterly, I think it was only last week, wasn't it, that we had the publication of government's Clean Flexibility Plan, and that now has started, or the roadmap, sorry, has really added some meat around that to give some clarity on kind of what that roadmap needs to look like. So again, I think very, very welcome. But of course, as you say, there's huge ambition, right? So, we're talking some, significant numbers, doubling offshore wind, doubling the amount of network build that we compared with what we built in the next 5 years, compared with what we built in the last 10 years. From our perspective, when we look at things like consumer-led flexibility, 4 to 5-fold increase in consumer flex, and I think 3 times tripling of the level of solar. So, these are eye-watering statistics, and we are less than 5 years now away from delivering that. So no shortage of ambition, as you say.
I think what we're hearing from our clients across the piece is that gratitude for the specificity that's emerging, whilst there's still remaining quite a few question marks about the precision of what's going to be delivered. I don't think we want to skip over just the quantity of policy setting that's taken place over the last year. It's been really substantial, but at the same time, everyone's waiting around for the remaining plans, the focus on the spatial piece, the regional plans. All of this is underway, although not necessarily fully visible to key stakeholders yet. But what we've already seen over the recent period has been really, really substantial. So yes, I think most of our customers would agree that clarity is welcome, even if there's an appetite for further precision in terms of plans.
I mean, just on that, just as you raise that point, I think it's worth recognising that when we're, within the sector, in different parts of the sector, different parts of those roadmaps and different parts of that ambition, create, in some cases, sufficient clarity to be able to know how to move forward. And Ofgem obviously playing a key part as well around identifying institutions, existing institutions, to take forward some of those things. And then Elexon, we're very clear around the role that we need to play and the leadership role we need to play. But yeah, you're right in the sense that, across the spectrum of all those actors that are going to be required to contribute, maybe there are more or less pieces, the jigsaw that are in place in order to give them clarity, for instance, to invest or to have some certainty around that direction. So yeah, continued leadership, continued clarity is going to be really important, I think. And in the clean flexibility roadmap, they have now introduced this concept of the commissioner, haven't they? So maybe that goes some way to addressing some of the concerns we've seen in some of the industry media around, where is that central architecture or central orchestration coming from? Because there are so many facets to the Clean Power 2030 plan that I don't think it's practically impossible for any one part of the industry to have a handle on all aspects of what's going to make that successful.
I think one of the most striking parts of the Clean Power 2030 kind of plans was the 12 gigawatt requirement for customer-led flexibility, which is an enormous increase, like you said, from before. And with your new role, or not so new now, but you're now, as Elexon, the flexibility market coordinator, and Elexon's already done a reasonable amount in terms of introducing new roles like virtual lead parties, virtual trading parties, putting asset metering in place. What's next? What's the most important thing to get to that 12 gigawatt number? Or can we rest on our laurels and say that virtual trading parties are enough? Will that bring neighbors across the street knocking on aggregators' doors trying to enter flexibility markets? Or what's the next steps that really gets us to that 12 gigawatt number?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you know, and plays a little bit to my response on the previous point, actually, that even if you took one element of the Clean Power Plan, such as consumer-led flex, that in itself requires a huge number of things to come together. And if I'm looking at this from a consumer's perspective, I'm thinking about trust. I'm thinking about my historical relationship with my supplier. I'm thinking about how innovative are suppliers getting in relation to roles as aggregators, and who do I have my relationship with. But coming from an Elexon perspective, which is kind of the other end, is how do we make it valuable, or how do we help customers change their behavior by actually feeling the impact directly in their pocket? And a lot of that is within the areas of market, I believe, in terms of ensuring that there's sufficient monetization happening in markets, which means on one side encouraging new flex service providers into the market so that they're able to innovate, they're able to take advantage of the much needed system related flex, but also things like time of use tariffs. So, off the back of hard value settlement, making sure that there are financial incentives to start to change the way people behave in relation to that, and that becomes almost like a virtual circle, so that the revenue flows are sufficient to incentivize change of behavior. And on the flip side of that, it also then is sufficiently monetized to encourage more and more players into the market. And overall, our goal on that would be to increase liquidity more generally. But as I said at the beginning, and you recognise, there are still a number of barriers in there, and we all are looking forward. I think it's due to be published next year now, which is the outcome of the Ofgem consultation on innovation in retail, which is a really important part of that. From our perspective, to get to that point where markets are operating effectively, then if I took the area of distributed flex, so at the DSO level, we have quite a job, and we are already underway with regard to kind of the first publication of the market facilitator rules in December, to aligning those markets. So having common definitions, dispatch API, common baselining methodology, understanding of how FSPs can revenue stack across multiple markets, and lowering those barriers that have grown up through a genuine desire of those DSOs to kind of develop compelling markets and products for themselves, but ultimately at the same time has created some barriers to enter this market, and asset registration is a great example of that, where if you want to register your assets, you then have to go through multiple processes by DSO to do that, and then you find that your assets are providing services in particular markets in a particular way. So we have a big role in lowering those barriers, really, and maybe a big theme of what I might be saying today is actually the need to really simplify that. So complexity will still be there, but actually how do we take some of that complexity away to just make it a lot easier to run your business, or from a consumer angle, just a lot easier to participate in this and actually overcome some of those trust issues.
Thinking about some of the projects we've been involved in over just the last few years, there is a really big change already across the consumer base, domestic and non-domestic, in terms of appetite. It goes hand in hand with availability of suitable tariffs, and particularly, the electrification of transportation is often a driver within communities or businesses. But the work we were doing 2 or 3 years ago, when we're engaging with the public, the appetite for those admittedly more complex seeming products, but the ones that serve their needs really well, it really has already started to change. So I think, again, great to acknowledge the transformation that started, whilst also being aware that there's still a fair way to go along that piece. But yes, some of those technical barriers will remain, but there is that behavioural piece, I think, as well, that we're still seeing. There's work to do there.
As you're highlighting there, I guess a fundamental that I didn't mention, but a fundamental in this is actually having sufficient demand going through flexible devices, or energy smart appliances as they're sometimes called, in order for you to actually have any meaningful demand to shift. So EVs are the obvious ones, and when you look at something like tariff innovation, I think we're seeing uptake of time of use tariffs at something like 107%, I think, last year, is where by far the majority of flex tariffs are going right now. And that's against a backdrop, I think, again, a general 7% growth outside of EVs. So there's no doubt that understanding, on one hand, like how do you change behaviors, but also how do you encourage the uptake of things like heat pumps, batteries, EVs, and make that compelling. And a big part of that is also looking at things like interoperability, because not all EVs are capable of connecting back to the grid and therefore being deployed in markets for vehicle to grid as well as just time shifting. So there's a big part to play, I think, in the smart secure electricity system, which government are rolling out shortly, to make sure, again, that if you're going to be investing in these assets, that you have the confidence to continue to invest, and that you will or you can ultimately benefit from that.
You obviously get a lot of data on everything. Do you think that we might be starting to see any signs that demand is going to start going up soon? Because we've been saying for quite some time in terms of forecasting that more electrification of heat and transport means electricity demand will go up at some point, but that's been stubbornly not happening for quite some time. I think maybe the last Dukes that came out showed that it kind of maybe plateaued a little bit. Do you think we're close to seeing it go up again?
That's a great question. This is a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because whilst on one hand I might be saying uptake of EVs is great because that inherently gives flexibility onto the system for system needs, one could argue that with demand increase, then that in itself is creating the challenge on the network that requires flexibility in the first place. I think what you're describing there, though, is the netting out, isn't it, of the growth of electrification at the same time as we're seeing overall reduction happening, either through energy efficiency or through shifts in things like economic activity, where you might see that. I think, what is it? We're forecasting a doubling, aren't we, of demand by 2050 in the net zero targets, which is still a little way away. Hedging now, aren't I, in terms of your direct question, Tom? But I mean, it has to, doesn't it? It has to go up, and it will go up, I think, as we start to see, back to my earlier point, the benefits. Actually, if you're going to buy an EV and you're going to feel that directly by a reduction in your costs of running that vehicle, or if you're going to get a heat pump and you're seeing the direct benefit of not paying large or spiky gas prices, you're going to invest in energy efficiency. Then we should see the benefit of that come through, and we should see the further uptake of those things, which inevitably will increase demand.
And that feeds through into settlement directly, because theoretically, one of the greatest benefits of market-wide half-hourly settlement is that you'll be able to measure that and its time of use correctly and pass the benefits across appropriately. So with market-wide half-hourly kind of thrumming along nicely, when do you think that we will probably see the biggest impact from half-hourly data?
Half-hourly, it's not a binary thing, as you know. The go live is actually planned the 22nd of September, which is imprinted on my mind, as you might imagine, with rather conveniently the 22nd of October being the point at which we start to migrate MPANs. For those customers that are in that early part of that migration, that they will start to feel the benefit, I think, across the market of the potential for innovation in tariffs. So time of use tariffs becoming more widely available and driving more competition within the supply market. I think that will start to happen reasonably quickly, but I think there is this almost inflection point as you start to get the vast majority of customers migrated onto the half-hourly model. And based on the data that we have from supply migration plans in aggregate, we're looking at about 80% of the total market. That's both domestic and I&C market being fully migrated by October 2026. So, I think there's a full year there where we should see the lion's share of customers migrated. And the other part of that, in terms of being able to share that data more widely, is, of course, the customer consent framework and the timeline for completion of that within the Retail Energy Code, which I think is shortly after that, later on in 26. So I think, the way I look at it is that you'll see some initial benefit, and then that will build, and then you'll get sort of some key milestones where those benefits will really start to flow. And then the next phase will be the benefit of having visibility of all of that data outside of energy suppliers, and the visibility of that encouraging further innovation and also further product development outside of suppliers potentially as well. So we're very much looking forward to that world, even if you say we sit on a lot of data post half-hourly migrations, but then that's coupled with all the other data that we already sit on as a result of our position within wholesale markets. So I think when you bring those two things together, what you get is a superset of data which becomes hugely valuable to industry. And I would say that Elexon has been a big supporter of open data, going back as far as 2021, even though we weren't compelled to do that. We do believe inherently in the fact that this data is not our data; it's industry's data, it's customers' data, actually, first and foremost, in large part. And we want to make sure that we are not only managing that responsibly, but also in a way where that is going to encourage value back to consumers, ultimately.
I think one of the elements that we keep coming back to with some of our analysis is a rising tide lifts all boats. There are these targeted, very specific benefits for some users, some of whom will have access and capacity and interest in it a lot earlier. But overall, those efficiencies, whether it's through better use of data or whether it is through things like time of use tariffs being on offer, there's the potential there for everyone to be better off, however actively involved they are. And that, it's good to have a good news story, I think, at this time. Consumers' concerns about bills, that is obviously not going anywhere. So having that facility to offer a more efficient system to lower costs, whether it's through direct action or whether it's across the system, it can only be a good thing.
It's a really good point. It's a point that sometimes I think can get missed, because there is a lot of focus, and quite rightly, around this being a fair transition and one that everyone can participate in. And I still believe wholeheartedly in that. But the point you raised is a really valid one, that even with early adopters and even with part of the market moving to operate flexibly, the impact that can have on system optimization, network investment optimization, running an overall more efficient system benefits everybody, even though you may not necessarily be one of those active consumers or early adopters. So yeah, absolutely agree.
On the kind of topic of all of that data being available and all of these markets being interoperable, how do you see code governance and the ability to manage that fitting in?
So we're in the middle, as you know. Elexon was one of the first to undertake the process alongside Repco of energy code reform, working with Ofgem. I think the pertinent bit to this and the objective, I think one of the primary objectives of code reform is to try to introduce maybe two things primarily. One is speed and agility, and then the other is greater accountability, and particularly not just around performance, but also around strategic alignment. So through things like the strategic direction statements and the delivery plans, being really clear around what is expected post-code reform, what you're delivering, and how effectively you're delivering that against set of very clear success criteria, both strategically and also performance-wise, as I say. So just coming back to the first point, though, because I think this is a really important point around the agility. What we can't do is erode the benefits of what I would call a really, truly independent and inclusive set of governance arrangements that really listens to players within the market. So, the danger in some respects of having much greater autonomy is an organisation that doesn't understand the value of that and therefore isn't listening and doesn't understand the potential for unintended consequences. And Elexon has a 25-year track record of operating under the current code arrangements, where we've really benefited from having access to the panel, but which will morph into a strategic advisory forum, but also the benefit of having industry experts participating in things like design work groups alongside Elexon's own market design capability. I think the two then coming together are a really important part that we need to kind of carry forward post-code reform. So it will look and feel a little bit different, but in terms of the principle, what makes good inclusive governance, I think because we understand that, I think the intent is to keep that and carry it through. And of course, that's against the backdrop of an increasingly diverse set of stakeholders. So when we were just running the balancing and settlement code, there was a very discrete set of BSC parties with flexibility. Now we're seeing that expand hugely into not just many different types of companies, but also significantly smaller companies who have different expectations, particularly around speed and agility, and also who are pushing the boundaries. So, one size fits all doesn't work for them. So I think the challenge for code managers going forward will be how to reconcile all these different voices. And I think that's where things like the strategic direction statement and more, perhaps more broadly, having a really good hook into energy policy development as setting some of that success criteria is really, really important, because we need to be continually looking forward to make sure that, yes, we're listening to the stakeholders, but the decisions we ultimately take are in the best interest of things like the energy transition, things like the CP goals, but also value to consumers. I can't remember the primary hook of your question, but I mean, it's quite a big one in the sense of, for code managers, it actually expands the criteria that we need to be what we would have called applicable objectives are set to widen further, I think. And of course, that's what I've been talking about is in the context of the BSC in some respects through code reform, but we're also seeing similar code management provisions grow through the market facilitator role. So what we've tried to do working with Ofgem is to create a set of rules and a governance framework which mirrors the intent of what's happening within the code reform, so that we end up with a reasonably consistent mechanism for market development, if you like, because a really important part going forward is going to be to maintain the alignment, so that when you're entering this market and you wish to be trading, whether that's as a VLP or VTP or whatever, or an aggregator, that you're not having to go through several different processes to register, for instance, or when you want to switch assets, or you've got a switching process going on, or you want to be entering different markets, that there is a separate set of hurdles. So the challenge for Elexon will be, how do we ensure that, despite the fact we've got slightly different arrangements, that we create a seamless customer experience for people engaging in these different markets. And I mentioned that point earlier on, which is how do we continue to remove the complexity, but also in the name of how do we then create a really simple user journey for our customers to make it really easy to do business.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be simple all the way. It just has to be simple to join and simple to understand. It can be a very complex thing, but as long as it's understandable, that's fine. It's a very complex industry, but we just need to make sure that people can get in and read everything and understand it in the easiest and most seamless way possible, which is, I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, I agree. And, that's why, for an organization like Elexon, our role though is to be able to handle that complexity, because you say the complexity doesn't just go away, but we need to shield as many people from it as possible by taking that burden ourselves. And I'm proud of the fact that we've got a huge amount of expertise and many years of expertise, both within Elexon and also within our panel, that are able to navigate that. But things like going back to the diversity of stakeholders, we've been doing quite a lot on digital code. And a big part of the value of digital code will be the ability to personalize that. So if you are a small flex service provider, do you need to understand every aspect of the 10,000 pages of rules that go alongside the balancing and settlement code? Or, should you be able to find just those things that are applicable to you to keep you compliant and to remove the complexity that way?
It would be remiss of us not to ask a question about REMA while we're here. So REMA, the review of electricity market arrangements, we've just had the decision that we will not be having a zonal electricity market, but that does leave a lot of things left open. What are the most biggest things now left on the table? Perhaps 15-minute settlement or moving gate closure?
Yes, well, you've jumped me for a second time now, because you know, Tom, probably that we had our annual meeting on the same day that they chose to make the announcement on REMA. So as you imagine, we got quite a few questions, and not many people had a chance to really digest what the announcement was saying. And I guess the first thing to say is that a huge amount of work has gone on within government to get to that point of ruling out zonal markets over many months or years, and we now have a decision on retaining a national market, but clearly with a desire to get as many of the benefits that would have come through zonal markets, but in a different way under a national market. And the challenge now, I think, is to really develop what the detail of those things are. There's talk of charging reform and CHNIOS reform.
It's a lot. I mean, it's a huge vein of complexity to tap if we had the time.
But as you say, there's also talk of constraint markets. There's talk of 15 or 5-minute settlement. It's been around for a little while, and as you know, is already in Australian markets. So yeah, there's a lot to go at in terms of Elexon. I think when it comes to things like short settlement periods, we were already looking at the potential for short settlement periods with European harmonisation pre-Brexit. And therefore, we've already done a fair amount of preparatory work within our own Connect platform to be shorter settlement period ready in terms of the ability of the system to be performant. I think there's just a question of around the policy aspect of that is, well, where is it appropriate, and what are the implications on markets, which we'll continue to work with government on. Personally, I'm also particularly interested in this notion of constraint markets. So how do you get some of the benefits of understanding what's happening locally and having that properly reflected through some form of price signal, if you like, or some ability to send a signal to what's traded within those constrained zones. And I think from a balancing mechanism perspective, I think this is with the REMA announcement, is one of the key focus areas will be how to make the balancing mechanism more efficient and effective, and that clearly is going to have to be one of the big levers that gets pulled. So I'm actually very excited about two things really. One, I think it's great that finally we have a decision. Appreciate that decision has been fiercely contested in the press media, in the trade media. But from our perspective, I think a decision was really what was needed, and we have that now. And I think then the next element of excitement is Elexon's ability to contribute to that debate and to work with government to make sure we get solutions that work.
I mean, Peter, you've alluded there to the fact that there's a huge amount of work that's been done across a lot of these areas already. We're not starting the next phase from day zero. These are really mature conversations. Lots of thinking's gone into it. So, completely agree from our customers who operate across the market. They're really glad a decision's been made as well. And there's a real keenness that there's momentum and speed to the extent that's possible, so we can get to the next stage of certainty, design, decisions, and so investment choices, operational decisions, they can all be designed, embedded in as soon as possible. So I think there's not necessarily a consensus about what the reformed national market should look like, but the underlying will is completely consistent. People don't want to take their foot off the gas. Now we have locational marginal pricing off the table, and it's again going to be best for consumers the sooner there is certainty there as well.
Yeah, and the prime example of that, which we haven't talked about, is the impending kind of AR7 and A8 auctions to come, and I'm sure this was in government's mind in their decision making. But these two auctions are going to be critical, as you know. They are going to dictate the level of renewables that can be built in time for the CP30 plan. So a lot is riding on the success of those two auctions.
So I've got a final question, and Tom, I think it's only fair that you and I answer this one as well. What's the most exciting innovation that you've come across or that you're spotting at the moment? Peter, what is it that is really standing out to you?
Goodness, that puts some pressure on, doesn't it, in terms of the impact? I mean, I think the thing that I was quite taken from is a bit geeky. Could I choose two, actually? What I just want to mention in passing. What I want to mention in passing, because I think this is really relevant and potentially game changing in terms of system stability and control, is grid forming batteries. So the ability of inverters. This is a little bit geeky, but in terms of their ability to actually replicate inertia, I think, is an amazing innovation. And anyone who's not that close to emerging battery technology and energy density and the role that batteries will need to play, certainly in short-term storage and flexibility, is going to be seriously impressive. I think, though, in terms of where I see most impact on, going back to Tom's question around consumer-led flex, I think the complexity of interactions and the scale of assets that we're now seeing on the system. We're seeing hundreds of thousands of assets now being aggregated in capacity markets. We're set to see millions of assets being registered. And these are just the early adopters, as you mentioned earlier. I don't think any of this transition around consumer-led flex can happen without very, very high degrees of automation. And it's not just the automation technology that is exciting, but it's the fact that, for me, what that technology will underpin is a really big shift in the way consumers start to think about energy, away from I turn the light on and it will always be there. Yes, it should be and will be, but the fact that it will change the mindset from one where I'm buying a commodity based on however much I use, to one of home service. So the ability to be able to determine the parameters. We're seeing with electric vehicles. So you now don't worry about whether you're going to charge it. You just say, when do I need it charged, or 80% charged, and when is it going to be at my house? And then within those parameters, someone else does all the complex decisions and how they're going to aggregate it, and then the consumer feels the benefit. So both from a consumer benefit perspective, but a practical step around how you make flexibility just very easy to participate in. I'd say the role of automation and load controllers emerging now, and that interoperability across devices, is probably the most exciting innovation that's going to make the biggest difference for me around consumer flex.
Fantastic. Tom, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to say the flexibility market asset register, because I spend a lot of time looking at different registers for different things and trying to piece them all together. And so the first time that someone in the GB market now has the responsibility to make a single source of the truth is very exciting, because it means that there can be a more easily compilable, more easily machine readable version of that database in one place that I can access and use then in my forecasting or reporting or whatever, link it to different parts of data, that having that one kernel of truth somewhere can unlock even more innovation later. And even if this is, it's not actually the final version of the single version of truth, it's just a single version of truth in one part that is going to bring together registers from other parts of the market together. But maybe it's the first step in getting to we know where the thing is and everything's connected to this database and we can all run it through together and see the full end-to-end chain of something happening. That I think would be very exciting. I think that there's basically no one in the market really who has that. Even NISO and Elexon don't have the full view really of every single thing from end to end across the capacity market, CFD, settlement, NISO services, and then eventually being able to pull all that together is the holy grail for my very sad little corner of the world.
Tom, I don't think you're going to find many people who object to better data quality after years in energy. It's poor data quality has been the downfall of many a well-intended project. So I think you'll have a lot of people who support that. I think for me, it's the innovation I'm seeing in the industrial sector. And in particular, I'm excited because we as an energy industry are getting better at accommodating that. We're asking an awful lot of our large energy users. We're looking to decarbonize the entire economy, and they are coming up with these amazing solutions that, even 5 years ago, there would have been very little traction in terms of making adjustments to accommodate these necessary changes. I'm not downplaying issues like cost of electricity, particularly in the industrial sector, in terms of being still barriers, but some of those signs, those big signs that said, do not enter unless you're willing to position the energy system at the center of the universe, a lot of those have gone away. And we're seeing a real dialogue, top to bottom, about how, in the interest of everybody, we can accommodate those innovations, and we can do it without it being an absolutely agonizing experience. So still a way to go there, but I really am enjoying seeing the improvements, and there's more to come, I'm sure. So we are at the end. Thank you so much for joining us, Peter. Thank you, Tom. And thank you for listening to the Energy Essentials podcast. You can find more episodes on our website, along with information about our analysis, our consultancy services, on flexibility and other energy matters. So go to cornwall-insight.com if you'd like to find out more.